The island was finally within reach, and the first step onto its shore would change everything. Morning came wrapped in pale mist. The Hispaniola lay anchored in a quiet cove, her sails lowered, her ropes creaking gently in the early light. Ahead of us, the island rose from the sea, dark hills, thick trees, and a shoreline that looked peaceful from a distance. Too peaceful. No one spoke much on deck. Even the sailors who had laughed loudly just days before now moved in silence. Boots thudded softly on wood. Ropes tightened. Oars were checked. The air felt heavy, as if the island itself were watching us. Long John Silver stood near the rail, gazing toward the shore. His face carried its usual friendly expression, but his eyes were sharp and restless. When he noticed me looking, he gave a small nod. Pleasant, harmless. Anyone else might have trusted that smile. I did not. Below deck, Dr. Livesey, the squire, and the captain gathered around the table. The map lay open between them. Lines and markings we had studied for weeks now pointed directly toward the land outside. "We must move carefully," Dr. Livesey said. "We know their plan. They do not know that we know." The squire's jaw tightened. "Let them believe they're in control," he muttered. It was decided that a group would go ashore first, ostensibly to explore, to stretch their legs, to prepare for the treasure hunt. In truth, it was a test, a way to see how the men behaved once they touched land. Silver clapped his hands loudly when the plan was announced. "Fresh air for the lads," he called. "A bit of shore does a sailor good." Several of his men eagerly volunteered. Too eagerly. Boats were lowered. Oars dipped into the still water. I found myself climbing down into one of the boats before I fully understood why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was fear. Or perhaps I felt that if I stayed close, I might learn more. The distance between ship and shore shrank with every stroke. When the keel scraped softly against sand, one of Silver's men jumped out and laughed. "Solid ground," he shouted. But the laughter sounded thin. I stepped onto the beach. The sand was pale and damp beneath my boots. The air smelled of salt and wet leaves. Trees stood thick and tangled beyond the shore, their branches woven together like a wall. Silver climbed out last, steady on his crutch. "Fine place," he said cheerfully. Could almost call it welcoming. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes moved constantly, counting men, measuring distance, noting the shape of the land. This was no casual stroll for him. The crew spread out slowly. Some walked along the beach. Others moved toward the tree line. A few remained near the boats. I watched carefully. Several men exchanged brief glances with Silver. Tiny nods, quiet signals. Nothing obvious, but enough. They were not simply exploring, they were preparing. Then one of the sailors stopped abruptly. "Over here," he called. We gathered around him. Half buried in the sand lay a skeleton. The bones were bleached white by years of sun and wind. The skull tilted upward, empty sockets staring toward the trees. One arm stretched forward, pointing inland. For a moment, no one spoke. Silver's expression changed, only slightly, but enough for me to notice. He leaned closer, studying the bones. "Flint," he murmured under his breath. The name settled over us like a shadow. Captain Flint, the pirate whose treasure we sought. If this skeleton belonged to one of his men, then we stood exactly where that terrible crew had once stood. The island was no longer just a destination. It was a graveyard. Some of the men shifted uneasily. Even the boldest among them seemed quieter now. The reality of the place pressed in from all sides. I felt it too. This was not a game, not a story told by lantern light. This was a place where men had lived, fought, and died, and somewhere on it lay the treasure. While the others examined the skeleton, I stepped back slowly. One step, then another. My heart beat fast, but I kept my movements small and careful. No one called my name. The trees stood close behind me, dark, dense, silent. I slipped into the forest. Branches scratched lightly against my sleeves. The ground was uneven and soft with fallen leaves. Within moments, the beach disappeared behind me, swallowed by green shadows. I stopped only when I could no longer hear the men. The forest felt alive in a strange way. Not loud, not dangerous, at least not yet, but watchful. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. That was when I heard it. A sound, soft, human, footsteps. Not the heavy tread of a sailor. Something lighter, careful. I turned slowly. Between the trees, a figure moved. Thin, ragged, barefoot. A man who did not belong to the ship. He stared at me as if he had not seen another person in years. And in that instant, I realized something that chilled me far more than the skeleton on the beach. We were not alone on this island. And whoever this man was, he might be the only ally we had.